Welcome to the next mini lecture. And this time we're looking at the Battle of Verdun. So this is the first of the three major battles that we're required to take a look at on the Western Front. And as you can see from the screen, we're looking at a very long-lasting battle, going from February through to November in 1916. So the set of notes that we have in place are our Battle of Verdun notes, and we'll work through these as well as the slides, the picture slides that I've got for you. So just recapping, before the Battle of Verdun starts in 1916, we had a series of battles back in 1915, but no major breakthrough. The Germans are mostly taking a defensive position. We did have the Second Battle of Ypres in April, but since then we see the Germans taking a defensive position on the Western Front during 1915. Partly this is because the Germans are trying to fight a war on two fronts at this point, and we've talked it before about how they had to send some of their troops from the Western Front across to the east in order to support their friends, the Austro-Hungarians, in the fight against the Russians. Also, we've got to remember this. The Germans are in foreign territory, and as we know, they're quite happy to be entrenched and settled in this foreign territory and leave it really to the Allies to attempt to shift them out of their position. So for the time being, it's in 1915, it was suiting the Germans to stay in that entrenched environment while they sorted out a few of their other problems relating to being in a two-front war. What I'd like to do, though, before we move on to looking at the battle is just refresh our memories of the leading commanders of each of our key armies. So for the French, we're still here with General Joffre, as they say in the French. Now, this guy's been in charge since 1911, well before the war began. Remember, he was in charge of putting the French back with an offensive kind of mindset, rebuild the status of the French army. And as we move into 1916, Joffre is still in charge of the French army. On the British side, we've got that very confusing Sir John French is the Commander-in-Chief of the British forces, and he's been there since the beginning of the war. But after the Battle of Loos in 1915, it becomes fairly clear that French is just not quite up to applying the strategies and tactics that are going to be needed by the British if they want to achieve some kind of breakthrough of the stalemate. And so French resigns from his position. There's quite a bit of pressure put on him, but he does resign, and he's replaced by a new general, General Douglas Haig, and he becomes the Commander-in-Chief of the British forces from December 1915. We will come back and meet more of Haig later on, particularly when we get to the Battle of the Somme later in 1916. But I just want to flag at this stage that we've got a change in the leadership of the British Army moving into 1916. And this is going to have an impact on planning of what the British are going to agree to participate in 1916. In the German army, remember that we have General Erich von Falkenhayn, who has been in charge since September 1914. Remember, after the Battle of the Marne, we had Moltke resign, and Falkenhayn has been in charge. So he was in charge of the Germans all the way through 1915. And it's Falkenhayn now that we need to think a little bit more about. And if we go back to our written notes, you can see here that I'm now up to this second paragraph here. So what we need to understand about each of our key battles is, number one, the goals of the battle. What is it that they were actually trying to do? What were the aims and goals of the generals in undertaking a particular battle? So if we look here at what Falkenhayn is thinking, he's thinking that the war is going to be won on the Western Front. This is the point at which the Germans are already in a good position, And this is the point that Falkenhayn feels that they can actually make or break the war. And he certainly thinks that the key to winning the war is beating the British. Not necessarily the French. The French are an obstacle, but if they can beat the British, the Germans can win the war. This is the way that Falkenhayn is thinking. So Britain's either got to be forced out of the war or defeated in some way. Now, Britain's navy is much too strong. Remember we've talked about the strength of the British Navy moving into World War I, all those dreadnoughts, and also Britain's an island. It's difficult to go and attack. So it's too difficult to tackle Britain directly. They need to put pressure on Britain some other way. And the way to do it is to put pressure on Britain's ally, the French. The French can be beaten. If they push the French enough, so thinks Falkenhayn, if the Germans can push the French enough, then what they can do is force the French out of the war, and the British will not be strong enough to continue alone. That's the key to beating the British. So the key to beating the British, beat the French first. And so this is why we see Falkenhayn develop a plan to attack the French. And his place where he's going to take the French on is at Verdun. Whoops. Let's have a look on here's our standard map of the Western Front. And Verdun, of course, is, Verdun is down, let's get our pointer out. Verdun is here in this part of the line. And you can see that Verdun is a massive salient, okay? Very large bulge around the town of Verdun here. Okay, so this is the area of the line that Falkenhayn has decided to amass his German troops and to attack the French. Now, this map here is a close-up, you might call it, of Verdun. So again here, the outside line here is where the front line was before the Battle of Verdun. So we're talking in the beginning of February. The town of Verdun is situated here with many little villages around, very sort of French kind of idea. And on this map also, you can see this shape here. What's that, a pentagon? That's actually a major fort. And the smaller red pink dots are a battery, which means that there is artillery stationed in that position, but not necessarily well fortified. Now, one of the things that you might be looking at this map straight away is, wow, look at all the forts. And there is. There's plenty of them scattered around Verdun. And this is because of the history of the area. So Verdun had been a place that we can associate with some kind of martial history or military history way back to Roman times, when the Romans were living in this area. But the most recent history of Verdun before World War I had been in that Franco-Prussian War in 1870. Remember the one where the Germans won very quickly and, humiliated the French, really, by taking Paris so easily. Well, Verdun had been the last place to fall in that particular battle. And it had been able to hold out because it was so well fortified around the town. So we can see the position of these forts all the way around the town to protect it. So Verdun had fallen, but it was the last to fall. Now, these forts, some of them date from medieval times, but they had been built upon and reinforced. So if I just take a look here, this one on the left here, this is Fort Douaumont, which is one of the key forts. You can see it's actually a pentagon shape, and you can see the fortifications around the outside. Now, what you can't see from this picture is this is actually built up, and there is a quite a deep stone fort under there, often covered with a lot of earthworks. Let me see, this photo here shows you a little bit better. So it's actually built up. They've got a huge amount of earth on top of the stone fortification. brick stone fortification. Inside of here, you would have had guns being able to stick out to point at the enemy. But you can see how difficult it might have been able for an enemy to actually seize this position and take it. You can see just up in this one here, you can just make out the little hole there, that's what we call a gun turret. And guns would have been able to stick out of that and shoot at the enemy as they run towards the fortified position. This picture here shows you, this one is from inside Fort Douaumont, and it actually shows you what it's like inside one of these forts, these huge barreled ceilings, very large spaces where men could have been fortified. Lots of reserves there to fight off an enemy attack. So that gives you a bit of a sense of what these forts actually looked like. And you can see them around here. That's Fort Douaumont that I was showing you, and also Fort Vaux were the two major forts that feature in this Battle of Verdun. The interesting thing, though, in 1916, if we go back to our map, remember our battles in 1915? There had been battles here at Champagne, but there had always been battles up here in northern France and in Belgium, but there hadn't really been any battles here in this area around Verdun. It was well fortified, and the French felt, look, this area is not going to be attacked by the Germans. It's too well fortified, and we can see that the fighting is fiercer in other parts of the line. And so they had actually moved a lot of the artillery equipment, so the guns that were helping to protect Verdun, they'd actually moved them to other parts of the line to reinforce other parts of the line, leaving Verdun not completely unprotected, but certainly not as well protected as it could have been. The other thing to take note of about Verdun is this. It had a special place in the hearts of the French because of its history, including its history in the Franco-Prussian War. And so the French felt a great deal for Verdun. And we're going to see, as the Battle of Verdun unfolds, a huge effort made by the French in order to protect Verdun. And in some ways, this was part of the reason why Falkenhayn picks it as his target. He feels that if he can take Verdun, he will help to crush the morale of the French. So there's a number of strategic reasons why Falkenhayn has picked Verdun as his target, and this is where he is heading in 1916. He's going to amass a huge army and try to take Verdun, crush French morale. Also, if he can close this line off across here, you can see how this is much longer than this line. So if they can actually close off the salient, then they will not need as many troops to actually defend this part of the line. So multiple reasons, really, why Verdun is the right place for Falkenhayn to launch his attack in 1916. So we might leave it there, and we'll come back and look at the Battle of Verdun in more detail in the next mini lecture.